I stood in my newly renovated apartment, running my hand along the freshly painted wall. Everything was perfect, from the hardwood floors to the crystal chandelier in the dining room. At 27, I'd finally created the home I'd always dreamed of, thanks to my success at Morgan & Stanley Investment and, if I'm being honest, the inheritance from my father. My name is Emma, and my story isn't exactly a happy one. You see, today I'm hosting a housewarming party, and I've made the questionable decision to invite my half-sister, Sarah, and my mother. Just thinking about it makes my stomach turn. As I arranged appetizers on silver platters in my gleaming new kitchen, memories from childhood came flooding back. The constant torment from Sarah, my half-sister, who seemed to take pleasure in destroying everything I loved. I was 7 when she was born, the product of my mother's relationship with Tom, a man who never bothered to marry her but did manage to send child support checks every month. I remember the day I got my first art set for my 12th birthday, a gift from my father. I'd barely had it for 2 days when I found Sarah, then 5, dumping paint all over my bedroom carpet and using my expensive brushes to paint the walls. When I ran crying to Mom, she just shrugged it off. "She's just a baby, Emma. She doesn't know any better." But Sarah did know better. Like the time she took scissors to my favorite sweater, the one Dad bought me for Christmas. Or when she accidentally spilled juice all over my science project the night before it was due. Each incident was met with the same response from Mom: "Don't be so dramatic, Emma." The worst part wasn't even Sarah's behavior, it was Mom's complete inability to discipline her. While I had rules and consequences, Sarah seemed to live without either. Mom was too busy enjoying the comfortable life provided by alimony from both my father and Tom to actually parent. That's why at 14, I made the decision that changed everything. I moved in with my dad. I still remember Mom's face when I told her. She wasn't upset about losing me, she was furious about losing Dad's alimony payments. We didn't speak for years after that. Living with Dad was like finally being able to breathe. He encouraged my interest in finance, helped me with my homework, and showed me what it meant to be valued. When he passed away during my college years, it felt like losing my anchor. He left me his entire fortune, which gave me the freedom to pursue my dreams, but also made Sarah's jealousy even worse. The doorbell rang, and I felt my heart rate spike. The first guests were arriving, my aunt and uncle, thankfully, not my mother and sister yet. As I opened the door, genuine warmth spread through me at their excited exclamations over the apartment. Soon the place was filling up with friends and relatives, all of them admiring the modern kitchen with its marble countertops and the elegant living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone was having a good time, drinking wine and sharing stories. Everything was perfect. The click of those stilettos got louder, and there they were, my mother in her usual overdressed glory, and Sarah, wearing a dress that looked like it was painted on. The party had been in full swing for over an hour, with soft jazz playing in the background and my guests engaged in pleasant conversation over wine and hors d'oeuvres. Just the kind of elegant, calm gathering I'd wanted. Sarah paused in the doorway, her nose wrinkling as she surveyed the scene. "Oh my God," she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Is this a party or a nursing home social hour?" The room went silent. My Aunt Caroline stopped mid-sentence, wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. No one laughed at Sarah's joke. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, but forced myself to stay composed. Sarah strutted into the apartment she had visited many times. Now it was completely renovated but still holding those precious memories of Dad. I watched as she ran her hand along the new granite countertop in the kitchen, inspected the designer light fixtures, and peered into every room. The jealousy was written all over her face, I'd seen that expression too many times not to recognize it. Her eyes had that same gleam they'd had when Dad bought me my first car, or when he paid for my college tuition. Then she spun around, a smile spreading across her face that made my blood run cold. "This place is amazing, Emma. I've decided, I'm moving in next week." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking. But Sarah's smile didn't waver. "I'm serious," she said. "This place is way too big for just you." And honestly, you owe me. You got everything from your dad, and what did I get? Nothing. Sarah, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level, you're not moving in here. Ever. This is my home. Her face contorted with rage. You selfish bitch, she screamed, causing several of my guests to jump. You think you're so much better than everyone else, because daddy left you all his money. You live in this fancy apartment while mom and I barely get by. I expected my mother to step in, to calm Sarah down or at least look embarrassed by her outburst. Instead, she stepped forward, arms crossed, and fixed me with an accusing stare. Emma, I can't believe how greedy you've become, she said, shaking her head. Would it kill you to help your sister? To give her a place to stay? After everything our family has been through? Our family? I repeated, my voice shaking. The family where you let Sarah torture me for years while you did nothing? That family? How dare you, my mother gasped. Come on, Sarah, we're leaving. Clearly, your sister cares more about her fancy apartment than her own family. Sarah stormed out, nearly knocking over a vase in the process. My mother followed, pausing at the door just long enough to give me a look of pure disappointment, the same look she'd given me when I chose to live with Dad. The door slammed behind them, and the apartment fell completely silent. Then, like a collective exhale, everyone seemed to relax at once. My Aunt Caroline came over and squeezed my hand, while others started quietly discussing what had just happened. Life returned to normal after the housewarming disaster. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about Sarah's outburst and Mom's accusations. Then, about a month after the party, my boss called me into his office. Emma, we need you to handle the Meridian contract personally, he said, sliding a folder across his desk. It's a big deal, 2 weeks in Phoenix to get everything sorted out. I nodded, already mentally preparing for the trip. Business travel was part of the job, and honestly, a couple of weeks away from the city, and any possibility of running into Sarah or Mom, sounded perfect. That evening, I sent Mom a quick message, heading to Phoenix for 2 weeks on business. Just FYI. I didn't expect much of a response, but the complete silence still stung a little. Ever since the party, she'd been giving me the cold shoulder, probably waiting for me to apologize. As if I had anything to apologize for. The 2 weeks in Phoenix were exhausting. Endless meetings, contract negotiations, and late-night document reviews. By the time I boarded my flight home, all I could think about was sinking into my comfortable couch with a glass of wine and finally relaxing in my peaceful apartment. The first sign something was wrong was the faint smell of stale alcohol and cigarettes in the hallway outside my door. My stomach clenched as I inserted my key, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. It looked like a tornado had torn through my home. Empty bottles and cigarette butts littered the floor. The expensive white leather sofa was covered in what looked like wine stains and burn marks. My beautiful freshly painted walls were defaced with God knows what, food stains, drink splashes, and what looked suspiciously like intentional graffiti. My legs shaking, I moved through the destruction. The massive TV I'd just bought was smashed, shards of its screen scattered across the floor. In the kitchen, dirty dishes were piled in the sink, and something that looked like old takeout was growing mold on my marble countertops. But the worst was yet to come. When I pushed open my bedroom door, I found Sarah sprawled across my bed, still wearing her shoes, clearly passed out drunk. My pristine white bedding was stained with makeup and what looked like pizza sauce. The sight of her there, sleeping peacefully in the midst of all this destruction, made something snap inside me. I grabbed her shoulders and started shaking her. Wake up, what the hell have you done to my home? She swatted at me like I was an annoying fly, mumbling incoherently. Fine. I marched to the bathroom, filled a glass with cold water, and returned to throw it directly in her face. Sarah jolted awake, sputtering and cursing. What the hell is wrong with you? She screamed, mascara running down her face. Stop screaming and tell me how you got in here, I cut through Sarah's stream of curses. And what the hell have you done to my apartment? Sarah wiped her face with my Egyptian cotton pillowcase and had the audacity to roll her eyes. Mom gave me the spare key, she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Said I could stay here while you were gone. But this place was so boring, all fancy and perfect and completely dead. So I had some friends over. The spare key, of course. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd given Mom that key years ago, right after Dad died, and I inherited the apartment. Just in case of emergencies, she'd said. And now she'd handed it over to Sarah without even asking me. Some friends over? I gestured at the destruction around us. You've completely trashed my home. Look at this place, the walls, the furniture, my TV. Sarah shrugged, reaching for her phone on the nightstand. We had some parties. Got a little wild. What's the big deal? You're loaded, you can just buy new stuff. Get out. My voice was shaking. Get out of my apartment right now. No. She flopped back on my bed, scrolling through her phone. I like it here. Mom said I could stay, and I'm staying. Deal with it. I pulled out my phone and hit Mom's number on speed dial. She answered on the third ring. Get over here. Now. My voice was ice cold. Come see what your precious Sarah has done to my apartment. 28 minutes later, yes, I was counting, Mom walked through my front door. I watched her face as she took in the scene, the stained walls, the ruined furniture, the bottles and garbage everywhere. Her expression barely changed. This, I said, my arm sweeping across the devastation, is what your daughter did to my home. The home Dad left me. The home I just spent a fortune renovating. And you gave her the key? Without even asking me? Mom picked up an empty wine bottle, set it on a side table, and straightened a crooked picture frame. I don't see why you're so upset, she said, her voice maddeningly calm. So they had a few parties. You have more than enough money to fix everything. It's not like you can't afford it. I stared at her, speechless. In that moment, I finally understood something I should have realized years ago. She would always choose Sarah. No matter what Sarah did, no matter who she hurt, Mom would always defend her. Always justify her actions. Always expect me to be the one to give in, give up, give more. Take Sarah and get out, I said through clenched teeth. Both of you, leave my apartment right now. Mom settled herself onto my ruined sofa, brushing aside some cigarette butts. Actually, I think this might be good for both of you. Sarah needs a place to stay, and you've got all the space. You two living together could help repair your relationship. Repair our relationship? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She broke into my home and destroyed it. I didn't break in, Sarah snapped, now sprawled across my armchair. Mom gave me the key. Stop being so dramatic. A key she wasn't supposed to give you. I could feel my control slipping. This is my home, mine. Dad left it to me, not to you, not to Mom. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. Sarah threw her head back and laughed. Mom joined in, both of them looking at me like I was a child making empty threats. Go ahead, Sarah taunted. Call them. What are you going to tell them? That your sister used a key to enter your apartment? That we had some parties? Boo-hoo. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Sarah's smirk faltered slightly as she realized I was actually doing it. 911, what's your emergency? I need police at 1542 Riverside Avenue, apartment 7B, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Someone's broken into my home and refuses to leave. Less than 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. 2 officers stood in the hallway, a tall man with graying hair and a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. I'm Officer Martinez, this is Officer Chen, the woman said. We received a call about a break-in? I let them in, watching their eyes widen as they took in the state of my apartment. This is my home, I explained. I was away on business for 2 weeks. My mother gave my spare key to my sister without my permission, and she's been living here, throwing parties, and destroying my property. Now she refuses to leave. You stuck-up bitch. Sarah lunged toward me, but Officer Chen stepped between us. Ma'am, please calm down, she said to Sarah, who responded with a stream of profanity that would have made a sailor blush. You can't arrest me. This is my sister's fault for being a selfish, rich. The rest of her tirade was cut off as Officer Martinez began reading her rights. Sarah fought and screamed as they handcuffed her, threatening to sue everyone, calling me every name she could think of. How dare you? Mom jumped up, finally dropping her calm facade. Having your own sister arrested? You ungrateful, vile creature. I should have known you'd turn out just like your father, cold and heartless. She stormed out after the police, shouting that she was calling our family lawyer, leaving me alone in my destroyed apartment. I stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the wreckage of my beautiful home. The TV alone would cost thousands to replace. The walls would need to be completely repainted. The furniture. I walked around making notes on my phone, tallying up the damage. I could get an appraiser in here, document everything, take Sarah to court. I had more than enough evidence, and with her behavior in front of the police, no judge would side with her. But as I looked at the growing list on my phone, I realized something. I didn't want to. I didn't want to spend months or years in court battles with Sarah. I didn't want to see her face across a courtroom or hear her voice in depositions. I deleted the list and made a different call instead. 24/7 emergency locksmith, a gruff voice answered. Hi, I need all my locks changed immediately. It's an emergency. A week after the police incident, my phone lit up with Mom's name. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. Emma, we need to talk, she said, her voice gentler than I'd heard it in weeks. Can we meet at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at noon? I think it's time we discussed everything that happened. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she'd finally realized how wrong she and Sarah had been. Maybe she was ready to apologize. Okay, I agreed. I'll be there. The next day, I arrived at the cafe right on time. Mom was already there, seated at a corner table with a spread of food in front of her, the most expensive items on the menu, lobster salad, truffle pasta, and a bottle of premium wine. I just asked for water. Emma, dear, Mom said, dabbing her lips with a napkin, we need to discuss the severe psychological trauma you've inflicted on your sister. I nearly choked on my water. Excuse me? Having Sarah arrested? Do you have any idea what that's done to her? She had to spend hours at the police station. Her friends all know about it. She's absolutely devastated. Mom shook her head sadly. The only way to make this right is to apologize and pay her compensation. $25,000 should cover the emotional distress. I sat there, stunned into silence for a moment. Then the words came tumbling out. Are you serious? Sarah broke into my home, threw wild parties, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property, and you think I should pay her? Mom waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so materialistic, Emma. So she had a few parties? Broke a few things? You're rich, you can easily replace everything. The emotional damage you've caused her, though? That's not so easily fixed. She walked toward the door, then turned back with a smile that made my blood boil. Oh, and be a dear and take care of the bill. I know how much you enjoy showing off your wealth. I watched her leave, then looked at the table covered in expensive dishes she'd ordered. The waiter appeared with the check, and I could see Mom had even ordered several desserts to go. The bill was over $200 for a lunch she'd barely touched. I walked into my partially repaired apartment, kicked off my shoes, and sat down at my desk. The cafe encounter kept replaying in my mind, Mom's casual demand for $25,000, her complete dismissal of the damage Sarah had caused, the way she'd stuck me with the bill without a second thought. Just like she'd been doing for years. Opening my laptop, I pulled up my banking records. There it was, in black and white, $2,000 transferred to her account every month since Dad died. Plus all the utility bills I paid, the property taxes on her house, the endless stream of emergency expenses she always needed help with. It had started after Dad's funeral. Mom had shown up at my apartment, crying about how hard things were financially, how she couldn't make ends meet. "I'm too old to find a job now," she'd said. And with Sarah still in school. I'd felt guilty about all the years we hadn't spoken, about moving out to live with Dad. So I'd agreed to help. That help had turned into an endless drain. New appliances, when hers mysteriously broke down. Designer clothes, because she needed to maintain appearances. Home repairs that somehow always cost thousands. And through it all, she'd never once looked for work, never tried to become self-sufficient. Why would she? She had me, her personal ATM. I opened a new email and started typing. "Mom. After today's conversation, I've made an important decision. Effective immediately, I will no longer be sending you monthly payments or covering any of your bills. The financial support I provided was always meant to be temporary, not a permanent arrangement. It was my choice to help you, not my obligation. I've spent years trying to make up for choosing to live with Dad, trying to prove I was a good daughter by funding your lifestyle. That ends now. It's time for both you and Sarah to support yourselves. Do not contact me about money again. Emma." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I went into my bill pay account and canceled all the automatic payments to her utility companies. The phone rang less than 15 minutes after I sent the email. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. "How dare you?" Mom's voice was shrill. "I am your mother. You have an obligation to take care of me. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By cutting me off without warning?" "You haven't done anything for me," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "You've taken and taken, and when I needed you to be a mother, when Sarah was destroying my home, when she was making my life miserable, you always chose her. Always demanded more from me while letting her do whatever she wanted. I raised you. I fed you. No, Dad raised me. From the time I was 14, he was the one who took care of me. You just lived off his alimony. And when that stopped, you found someone else to support you. Now it's time for you and Sarah to support yourselves. You ungrateful little." I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again, but I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked her number. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The messages started flooding in almost immediately after I blocked their phone numbers. First through WhatsApp, then Facebook, then Instagram, and even LinkedIn. Each one more desperate and angry than the last. "You're destroying this family," Mom wrote. "Hope you're happy being rich and alone," Sarah messaged. "Only a heartless person would abandon their mother and sister. You'll regret this when you need us." I blocked them on every platform, one by one, but they kept finding new ways to reach me. They even started messaging my friends, telling elaborate stories about how I'd abandoned them to poverty while living in luxury. I wasn't taking any chances with my security. I spoke with Frank, our building's concierge, explaining the situation. "My mother and sister aren't allowed up under any circumstances," I told him. "Even if they say it's an emergency." The very next evening, when I came home from work, Frank stopped me. "Ms. Thompson, your mother and sister were here about an hour ago. They tried to convince me they had your permission to go up. When I refused, your sister got quite vocal. I had to threaten to call security before they left. I thanked him and increased his Christmas bonus on the spot." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into renovating my apartment again. New furniture, fresh paint, replaced TV. I erased every trace of Sarah's destruction, every reminder of that nightmare. But something felt different now. This place that had once been my sanctuary, my connection to Dad, felt tainted. Through the family grapevine, I heard stories. Mom and Sarah were struggling financially, bouncing from relative to relative, asking for loans they'd never repay. They were telling everyone who would listen about how I'd cruelly cut them off, conveniently leaving out the part about breaking into my home or demanding compensation for being arrested. I ran into Mom a few times in the neighborhood. It was inevitable, given how close she lived. She'd try to corner me, alternating between angry demands and tearful pleas. "Emma, please, can we just talk? We're family." I'd walk past without a word, my heels clicking on the pavement, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Last week, I found myself looking at real estate listings. Modern condos in different neighborhoods, secure buildings with strict access policies. Places where I could truly start fresh, without the constant anxiety of running into them or wondering if they'd try to break in again. Dad's apartment had been my home for so long. It held so many memories, homework sessions at the kitchen table, Sunday morning pancakes, long talks about my future. But maybe it was time to let it go. I bookmarked a listing for a penthouse in a new development across town. The building had 24-hour security, private elevator access, and a stunning view of the city. More importantly, it represented something I'd been seeking my whole life without realizing it: true independence. A clean slate. Tomorrow, I'm going to call the realtor. It's time for a fresh start, one that's truly my own.
Why are you here? Don't tell me a high school graduate and poor person is trying to get treated by a doctor? My ex-husband chuckled to himself as if he found his own words amusing. Unmoved by his disdainful behavior, I remained calm. It's none of your business. What a cold woman you are. Just so you know, even at a university hospital, there's no cure for being a high school graduate or poor. Unable to find humor in his poor joke, I didn't laugh. Just then, I noticed a nurse rushing towards us. She waved her hand when she saw us. "It's an emergency. We have a patient in critical condition, unconscious. Please come immediately." My name is Mandy. I'm the eldest of 4 siblings and lost my father when I was in elementary school. After his death, my mother raised us alone. But the debt he left made it difficult for her, despite her hard work. I was forced to work at a local factory to help support my family. I wanted my younger siblings to follow their desired paths without financial hardship. So I worked relentlessly. The turning point came when I was 18. After being invited to dinner several times by a supervisor, Steese, from my department, he proposed a relationship. And I also had a favorable impression of him. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and on my 20th birthday, I accepted his marriage proposal. I had told Steve about my educational background from the beginning of our relationship. But he always said, education doesn't matter when you love someone, and strived to treat me as an equal. Although he was older, he never acted superior and always respected me. However, that was only a temporary dream. Over time, Steve increasingly looked down on me. "Hey, show some gratitude. Who do you think is making it possible for you to live like this?" His disgruntled voice made me tense up. After our marriage, at his strong insistence, I quit the factory to become a full-time housewife. I had planned to continue working even after marriage, but he wanted me to stay home, preparing meals and keeping the house clean every day. I was worried about reducing the amount I could send to my mother. But I couldn't bring myself to resist, so I quit my job. Yet, Steve looked down on me as an unemployed who didn't work and only cost money. "Steve, I want to work too." He scoffed at my feeble attempt at protest. Few companies would hire a high school graduate. Just obey me and keep quiet doing the housework. His cold voice echoed. Quitting my job as he demanded was a mistake. The allowance he gave me was gradually decreasing. If I said I needed more money, he would surely blame my management skills. Knowing this, I couldn't speak up and covered the shortfall with my own savings. While watching my husband drink idly in the evening, I thought vaguely about divorce. Fortunately, I'm still young. If I divorced Steve, I could still have children with someone else. He probably doesn't know how much I'm suffering. He must think I'm a stupid woman who doesn't listen to him. Slowly feeling my heart growing cold, I pondered without being able to take any action. As I watched my savings dwindle and endured Steve's contemptuous behavior and our poor marital relationship, I realized this couldn't continue. I repeatedly tried to discuss things with him, but each time, he avoided conversation with excuses like being tired from work or having plans to go out. Eventually, he even started saying, "I don't even want to talk to someone with such a low education." I had reached my limit. After finishing dinner and putting things away, I took out the divorce papers hidden in a drawer. My section was already filled out. All that was left was to bring up divorce to him. Moistening my dried lips, I summoned the courage to speak to him as he watched TV. "Steve, I have something important to discuss." Hearing my tense voice, Steve turned around lazily. Holding out the thin piece of paper, I faced him directly. "I want a divorce." Steve's eyebrows twitched. I braced myself for yelling. However, contrary to my expectation, no shout came. Cautiously checking his reaction, Steve quietly clenched his fists, his face turning red with anger. Yet, he didn't approach me. Perhaps thinking that doing anything more would mean defeat. Trying desperately to control his swirling anger. After a long silence, he growled in a low voice. "A high school graduate like you." His fists trembled more intensely, his angry gaze piercing me. His cold look was chilling, and I instinctively stepped back. "Do you really think you, a high school graduate, can defy me? You don't have any right to initiate a divorce." My husband's voice was loud and intimidating as he vented his anger. Still, I couldn't back down. I had suffered enough at his hands. Holding back the urge to cry, I glared back at him. Perhaps surprised by my unexpected strength, he momentarily looked taken aback. Clutching the divorce papers in one hand, I raised my smartphone towards him. On the screen were messages between him and a female subordinate, which was clear evidence of his affair. "While you can't even provide me with enough for basic living expenses, it seems you've been quite generous to her. If you don't need me anymore, then let's get a divorce and set me free." For the first time, my husband was at a loss for words. He apparently didn't know I had evidence of his affair. He must have been overly confident that I would never find out. After a while, unable to find an excuse, and realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it, he laughed defiantly. "It's exhausting to live with a stupid woman. I need a break." Without any remorse, he admitted to the affair and turned his back on me as if the conversation was over. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, and I circled around to turn off the TV, bringing silence back to the living room. His sullen face turned towards me. I steadied my trembling legs and presented the divorce papers to him again. "All I'm asking is for you to sign this. Please." I couldn't understand why he was so reluctant to divorce. He looked down on me, saying he was tired of living with me and cheated with another woman, yet he clung to this marriage. If he insisted I had no right to ask for a divorce, I was willing to let him initiate it. Public perception and pride didn't matter to me if it meant getting away from him. "If you really want a divorce that badly," he said with a sigh as he reached for the divorce papers, "then return all the living expenses I've paid you. If you can do that, I might agree to the divorce. That's impossible. Can't do it, huh? Well, that makes sense since you're a jobless and high school graduate. He chuckled deeply, finding something amusing in his own cruelty. Over the 3 years of our marriage, even by the lowest estimates, he had given me over $50,000 for living expenses. Although I hadn't received much lately, it was still a substantial amount that my savings couldn't cover. Almost all of it went to rent and groceries, and I had little to no discretionary money. Despite my best efforts to save, I often had to dip into my own savings to make ends meet. I couldn't accept his absurd demand, and I felt darkness closing in. He seemed to enjoy laying these impossible conditions on me, watching me struggle. Then, a small flame of resolve lit up within me. I wanted to prove him wrong. My determination solidified. I'll pay it all back, I declared firmly, meeting his gaze. He half smiled, clearly thinking I couldn't possibly manage it. But that was exactly why I had to do it. Can I have some time, though? And I'd like to settle the divorce first. You wouldn't want to keep living with a woman who might take your assets, right? He seemed uncertain of my intentions for a moment, but then hastily signed the divorce papers without much thought and handed them back to me. It's just an empty promise you can't keep. Don't spread this around. It would ruin my reputation. With those selfish words, our marriage abruptly came to an end. But I felt no despair. I was fortunate to be only 23 years old. As long as you're young, you can do anything, my mother always said. I quickly packed my bags and left the house without a second glance at my husband. Dragging my suitcase, I boarded an express bus home. The next time I would see my husband, everything would be dramatically different. I reaffirmed my resolve as I watched the urban landscape flow by outside the window. 12 years later, I found myself standing bewildered in the lobby of a university hospital. It was my first visit, and the vast grounds had me completely lost. I tried to ask for directions, but every staff member seemed too busy to care about a lost visitor. I spun the map in my hands, trying to figure out where I was and where I needed to go. Could it be Mandy? Suddenly, a man's voice called my name from behind. I turned around, startled, to find a man who looked to be approaching middle age. I felt I had seen his face somewhere before but couldn't place it. Excuse me, but who might you be? As I asked apologetically, the man sighed deeply and looked down at me. Oh, come on, does a high school graduate also have bad memories? It's unimaginable to forget someone you were married to. Hearing that, I took a hard look at the man's face. Memories slowly started coming back to me, particularly his condescending gaze. Steve. Having been addressed by name, Steve settled into a chair in the lobby with a satisfied air. Prompted by him, I somewhat reluctantly took the seat next to him and observed his face again. His hair had thinned, and his face had aged significantly. Most notably, the trim figure he once had was now flabby and his belly protruded. 12 years had indeed changed him. You recognized me quite well, didn't you? Well, of course, your face hasn't changed at all, and you're still ugly. His casual insult didn't faze me. I was too weary to make a fuss about it. My lack of reaction seemed to disappoint him, and he scratched his head disinterestedly, letting an awkward silence hang between us. What did he want by speaking to me? Surely, he couldn't possibly remember the promise from 12 years ago. He adjusted his graying hair and then looked at me with a sly grin. Why are you here? Don't tell me a high school graduate and poor person is trying to get treated by a doctor? He laughed at his own joke. I remained unaffected by his demeaning behavior. It's none of your business. What a cold woman. Just so you know, even university hospitals don't have a cure for being a high school graduate or poor. I couldn't muster a laugh at his poor joke. Just then, I noticed a nurse rushing toward us, waving her hand. Mandy, we have an emergency. The patient is unconscious and in critical condition. Please come right away. I immediately stood up and took a lab coat from the nurse. Steve stared at me in disbelief. Thank you for your support on your first day after transferring. There are no other doctors available right now. The nurse ushered me away quickly, leaving no time to pay any mind to Steve. I handed him the map I'd been holding, as I didn't have time to dispose of it properly. He watched me, eyes wide, unable to grasp the situation. As you see, I became a doctor. After dealing with the emergency, I was due to enter the consultation room. It was still before the official start of my shift. But wandering the hospital alone, I'd likely get lost again. I reviewed the medical chart and gasped when I saw who it was. Steve, too, widened his eyes in disbelief upon seeing me in the examination room. According to the chart, Steve was suffering from a heart condition and had been referred to the university hospital. I immediately composed myself and returned to my duties. Steve, seemingly dissatisfied, did not attempt to hide his sour expression. Any questions before you leave? I asked routinely. How did a high school graduate become a doctor? He muttered under his breath. The nurse behind me looked at him with a puzzled expression. I hesitated for a moment before responding. My father was a doctor. It's not that I was not intelligent enough to attend university. I remembered my father vaguely. He was always busy with work, rarely home, and squandered most of what he earned on alcohol and hostess clubs, even accruing debts. Yet, I was grateful for his passion for education, without which I would not have become a doctor. I had always believed, since I was aware, that I would be a doctor like him. I never struggled academically through elementary and middle school, even in high school, and my mother was always pleased, confident I could become a doctor. After my father passed away, I had to start working. But I continued to study diligently, and eventually applied to medical school. But you couldn't have afforded university. My mother saved all the money I sent home. There was also a scholarship program. A scholarship? You. His demeaning tone almost got to me. But I quickly regained my composure and glanced at his worn-out face. You always underestimated me as a stupid high school graduate. But you just never noticed. His face contorted with displeasure as he glared at me. A nurse whispered from behind that it was almost time. I put away the chart and prepared to call the next patient. Then, as if remembering something, I looked back at him. Oh, as for the living expenses you wanted me to repay, I can pay them back now, and double the amount. I earn more than you do now. His face flushed a deep red. I had chosen my words carefully to crush his excessive pride. Although his anger visibly bubbled, he managed only to stand up. With a loud noise in the examination room, which was a public space visited by other staff. What is this, a quack doctor? I'll file a complaint against this hospital. With that disjointed parting shot, he stormed out of the examination room. Left alone, I exhaled deeply, releasing the fatigue. Despite the weariness, I felt oddly refreshed. Eventually, Steve chose to seek treatment at another hospital. But he was advised there as well to return to the university hospital where I worked. When he came back, he looked uncomfortable. After our divorce, the woman he had an affair with had left him. and rumors of his infidelity had spread throughout his office. The affair and our divorce had become public, forcing him to resign. He had been abandoned by both women, damaging his pride, increasing his drinking and smoking, which had led to his heart condition. I felt a slight pity as he faced a major surgery. But considering how he had treated me during our marriage, I couldn't find it in me to forgive him. Of course, his treatment was a separate matter, and I carried out my duties professionally. We still see each other occasionally during his checkups. At one point, he even suggested we try again, but I politely declined. I have no intention of marrying anytime soon and am happily living with my family. It might sound strange for me to say, but as a doctor, my reputation is quite good, and I earn enough to support my mother and siblings. Amidst my busy but fulfilling days, I sometimes reflect on that fruitless marriage. I'm building the ideal family with my new wife and this child right here. So, I'm divorcing you. You and your son need to leave this house immediately. My husband raised his voice with a snort. He had started a company making children's clothes when I was pregnant. Initially, he worked earnestly, but now he spends his days playing. And the company's management is barely hanging on. In the midst of dealing with my parents' death, he suddenly showed up with his mistress and their child. Confused, my son and I thought it unwise to argue in front of the house. So I let the three of them in. Suddenly, they demanded that my son and I leave the house. Despite the difficult situation of my parents' passing, my husband's unreasonable demands infuriated me. I was dumbstruck and couldn't respond. However, my son snorted. "Hey, what's with that insolent attitude? Dad, it's impossible for you to divorce Mom. What are you talking about? A divorce can be done with just a single form. Don't you even know that, being a high school student?" But, as my son began to explain, Scott's face turned pale. "My name is Michelle Ford, a 47-year-old part-time homemaker. I help out with my family business part-time. I have one child, my son Aaron, a 16-year-old high school student. I've been married to Scott for 17 years. He's the president of an apparel company. Scott spends his days playing, though we can't afford such a lifestyle. The company barely makes a profit, and we're in a dire financial state. Scott's income is unreliable, and he spends most of his salary on leisure. So it feels like I'm supporting our family with my part-time income. Aaron is very kind and always helps with household chores. However, he is cold towards Scott, and they do not speak to each other. Initially, I thought it was just a rebellious phase, but since he's kind to me, I realize it's because he dislikes Scott. Soon after starting high school, Aaron began working part-time. Scott and I met through work. I was working as a fashion magazine editor, and Scott was a designer at an apparel company. We met during a meeting to discuss featuring his company's products in a date outfit feature. The point of this outfit is to match the shoes and skirt colors to make the legs look slimmer. The color is white, which I think adds a sense of purity. That sounds great. The focus is clear, and it looks like it'll make for an understandable feature. Thank you. I've prepared a lot because it's been a while since I've had such a meeting. Scott was very serious, and he made various proposals during the meeting. After seeing him, I imagined that building a family with him would lead to a fun future. One day, when my company and Scott's had a dinner meeting, a tipsy Scott opened up to me. "I want to dress my kids in the clothes I design. So, someday, I want to marry a good wife and have her give birth to adorable children. Have you ever designed children's clothes, Scott? Yeah, when I first joined the company, I was in charge of designing children's clothes. That's a wonderful dream. I also want to help make such beautiful dreams come true. Michelle, you have nice dreams too. After that, Scott asked for my contact details. We became close and eventually, Scott confessed his feelings, and we started dating. We were both nearing our 30s and married within a year of dating. I became pregnant soon after our wedding. During the early stages of pregnancy, I temporarily quit my part-time job and struggled with morning sickness. Hey, Scott. Why are you home this morning? I've decided to quit my job and start my own business. I think now is the time to make my dreams come true. Starting your own business? At a time like this, when a child is about to be born, I was taken aback. Don't worry, a client told me they have a job they want me to do. So there will be work. I see. But starting an apparel company requires a lot of preparations, right? Like, you need money for an office and to buy equipment. Yeah. But I don't have much money for preparations. Disappointed by Scott's lack of planning, I desperately searched for places to borrow money. However, all bank applications were denied. Preparing for the worst, I consulted my parents, who then offered to help Scott establish his company. They probably did so because they were expecting a grandchild. I'm truly grateful for my parents' kindness. Scott worked hard every day for the upcoming child. Although he often came home late from work, he never complained when I couldn't cook due to morning sickness. On weekends, he actively took on laundry and cleaning. However, Scott's attitude changed drastically one day, the day our child was born. When my water broke at night, Scott rushed me to the hospital. Scott, is your work okay? It's fine. There are no pressing business deals or deadlines. So I'll stay with you throughout. Don't worry about me, just focus on yourself. Scott spoke kindly and firmly held my hand as I struggled through labor. A few hours later, the birth was successfully completed. Congratulations. It's a healthy baby boy. A boy. Yes, a healthy baby boy. Is there something wrong? The nurse was puzzled, but Scott's solemn face didn't change. In fact, Scott had been hoping for a girl since I got pregnant. He often handled projects for girls' children's clothing at work. And since starting his own business, he had been working as a designer specializing in girls' children's clothing. During my pregnancy, all his children's clothing designs were for girls, and he had spent the entire time expecting a girl. We moved to the maternity ward, but Scott's disappointed expression remained. Scott, it's a boy. I'm sorry. Why isn't it a girl? There's nothing we can do. The gynecologist said there was a high chance of it being a boy. And, more importantly, we can't control the gender of our child. Then put the child in a baby box until you give birth to a girl. What? I would never do such a horrible thing. Whether the child is a boy or a girl, they are my irreplaceable child. Scott began to distance himself from me, and I found myself raising our child alone. Hoping his depression was temporary, I persevered in housework and childcare with support from my parents. I also returned to part-time work, working hard every day. My coworkers were supportive of my parenting, and when Aaron was young, I could even bring him to work. However, as Aaron grew, Scott continued to neglect our family. Eventually, Scott's days away from home increased, as did his late returns. Dad. I won a gold medal in the summer vacation art competition. Huh, so? What are you trying to say? What do I mean? Are you trying to brag that you have more artistic talent than me? No, that's not what I mean. Scott, don't upset Aaron. Why don't you praise him a little? Shut up. Fine, it's a nice painting. Scott, clearly in a bad mood, slammed the door shut. His attitude towards Aaron was terrible. And he never participated in Aaron's school events. Whether it was the entrance ceremony, open class, music recitals, or graduation. His father was never present, which made Aaron feel alienated. Over time, Aaron grew to detest his father. Then, a significant turning point arrived. One Sunday, while I was cooking dinner, I received a call from my sister. Hello, is that you, big sis? Michelle. Mom and Dad have passed away. They passed away. The sudden news left me in shock. They had helped us so much since Aaron was born. I hadn't been able to repay them, and I was at a loss for words. Why? They were fine when I saw them at Christmas. They were hit by a car that ran a red light. Can you come to the hospital right now? Scott and Aaron haven't returned yet, so I'll head over as soon as they're back. I ended the call with trembling hands. When would Scott return? He hadn't told me when he would be back. So I didn't know when I could go to the hospital. I tried calling Scott but couldn't reach him. Even my messages were left unread. Why now, of all times? Despite my irritation, I was sinking into sorrow. Mom, what's wrong? Oh, sorry. Don't worry about it. What were you talking about on the phone just now? Actually, your grandparents have passed away. So when your father returns, we're going to the hospital where your grandparents are. Understood. Aaron sat down on the sofa with a sad expression. Then I heard a car stop. Looking through the window to our driveway, I saw Scott's car. Good, Scott's back. Wait, what? Next to Scott was a woman dressed in high-end brands. Her flashy nails well manicured, a woman of tastes quite different from mine. Flamboyant and ostentatious. Beside the woman was a child dressed in pink. Could she be an acquaintance of Scott's? Is the child hers? But Scott was holding the woman's hand. Who was this woman? My mind was in chaos, and I panicked. Hey Michelle. It's me. Open up. Without even ringing the intercom, Scott was rattling the entrance door. To avoid further commotion, I hurriedly opened the door. Scott, welcome back. There's a crisis right now. Who is this? I stared at the woman next to Scott. She held his arm confidently, as if she had been waiting to introduce herself. Nice to meet you. I'm Scott's wife, Kristen. Hey, Kristen. Calling yourself the wife is a bit premature, isn't it? Scott and Kristen began cooing in sickly sweet voices. And who might this child next to you be, Kristen? Nicole, say hello. Nice to meet you, I'm Nicole. Nicole is the child Kristen and I have together. Kristen gave me a girl, unlike you. A child. My body tensed up. Could it be that Scott had a mistress and a child while he was away from home? Hey Michelle, let us in. I have something to talk about. All right. With no choice but to continue the conversation inside, I followed Scott's direction and let him and his mistress into the house. Guests? Yes, it seems Dad brought his mistress. Mistress. Dad was having an affair? It looks like it. We're about to have a detailed talk. can I sit in on this too? If Aaron wants to join, that's fine. I hesitated to involve Aaron in what might be a messy situation. But seeing his serious expression and realizing he was old enough to understand, I let him sit next to me. We moved Nicole to another room and sat down. Kristen across from me, Scott across from Aaron. Scott seemed displeased with Aaron's presence, but I decided to proceed regardless. I'm building the ideal family with Kristen and Nicole in this house. So, Michelle, I'm divorcing you. You and Aaron need to leave this house right now. Scott, you're so cool. Scott raised his voice with a snort while Kristen gazed at him with starry eyes. I was sick of their couple-like behavior, and it made me nauseous. Despite the dire situation of my parents' passing, my husband's outrageous statements infuriated me. I was dumbstruck and couldn't respond. However, Aaron snorted in disdain. Hey Aaron, what's with that cheeky attitude? Dad, it's impossible for you to divorce Mom. What are you talking about? A divorce can be done with just a single form. Don't you know that, being a high school student? Dad, you haven't repaid the money Grandpa lent to the company, have you? Scott's face turned pale all at once. Kristen looked puzzled. I almost burst out laughing seeing the temperature difference in their expressions. In fact, Scott had borrowed money from my parents, with the promise to repay it gradually once the company stabilized. However, Scott had been making excuses to delay repayment. Could it be, Dad, that you wanted to divorce to escape repaying? But that's not going to work. Grandpa told me to make sure you repay. When did you make such a promise? Were you with my father-in-law while I was gone? I've actually been meeting with Grandma and Grandpa quite a bit. Where did you meet them? At my part-time job, Grandpa's company. Don't you even know where your child works? You're lying. This is the first time I've heard of it. Yes, in fact, my son had been working part-time at my parents' company. Aaron, having seen me support the family all this time, wanted to help me someday. When he entered high school, he expressed his desire to work part-time. When he was wondering where to work, I suggested to my parents that he work at their company. Then, my parents happily agreed, saying it would be good training for an heir. Initially, Aaron was assigned simple clerical work. But he also got involved in tasks like advising on new products, which could be handled by someone young, and he enjoyed his work. Since starting the part-time job, Aaron had become more reliable. His words were stronger than anyone else's, and I almost cried with joy seeing how hard he had worked raising him. So, Scott, make sure you repay the $100,000 our parents lent, okay? Encouraged by Aaron's words, I delivered the final blow to Scott. Scott, what's this about? You told me you were a department head at a major apparel company, with an annual income of $100,000. Is this debt of $100,000 real? Kristen. It's not true. What he's saying is nonsense. I can show you proof if you want. I have the loan repayment agreement at home. Stop it, Michelle. Ignoring Scott's words, I showed the repayment agreement we had signed when we received the financial support. Scott collapsed to his knees. There's no way I can pay back such a large amount of money. It's impossible. Scott. This story is true, isn't it? Dad, like I said earlier, you can't divorce until you repay the money. Shut up. If that's the case, Kristen, can you take over my debt? I'll repay it quickly for Nicole's sake. Kristen, what do you think? We could get married right away, right? Kristen's face turned increasingly red. Scott, you liar. I didn't know anything about this. First of all, this debt isn't something I created. Scott and Kristen suddenly started arguing. Aaron looked down on them with a disgusted expression. For Aaron's sake too, please don't show us such an ugly sight. I picked up Nicole, who was in another room, and kicked out Scott, Kristen, and Nicole from the house. Mom, let's hire a detective to claim compensation from Dad. Yes, I'll think about it. I felt proud of my son's dependable appearance. Then I made a phone call. Hello, it's me. I have a favor to ask, is that okay? When I explained the situation to the person, they replied, Understood, let's start moving on it tomorrow, in a gentle voice. After that, I spent several busy weeks. There were lots of things to do, like the funeral for my parents and taking over the company. I was sleeping late and waking up early, leading to days of sleep deprivation. I ended up with a bad cold and couldn't go to work for a while. Aaron cared for my health and did the housework after school. While eating the rice porridge Aaron made, the intercom rang. Michelle. Open up quickly. I staggered to the entrance and slowly opened the door. What's the matter, Scott? Why did you come all of a sudden? My company has been leveled. Where did my company go? Company? What are you talking about? There's no such company. Did you do something? You shouldn't just get rid of the company I started for my dream. Despite feeling unwell, Scott grabbed me by the collar. As I was coughing, he seemed to realize something and suddenly pushed me away. I stumbled and fell to the floor. What, a cold? Don't spread your filthy germs to me, disgusting. Isn't that a terrible way to treat Michelle? I think it's very rude. Tracy. Emerging from the back of the room was my sister Tracy. She has always been strong on justice and very strict with people who do not keep promises or rules. Since Aaron was born, Scott had become slovenly and was quite afraid of my sister. Why are you in the house? To discuss that, can you stop rampaging at the entrance and come inside? Overwhelmed by my sister's pressure, Scott reluctantly entered the house. With a dominating look, my sister stared down at Scott, who trembled like a small animal frightened by its natural predator. Tracy, why are you in the house right now? I needed to discuss the company takeover with Michelle. Company takeover? What are you talking about? Ah, right. Actually, I've absorbed and merged your company. Absorption merger. I haven't heard anything about that. Scott's shoulders shook violently. I wanted to laugh out loud seeing his pitiful state. But knowing my sister would scold me for such behavior, I held back my emotions. In fact, Tracy had been managing Scott's company for quite some time. Scott had neglected the business due to his affair, and the company was almost bankrupt. I, busy with my part-time job, hadn't realized it. But when Tracy investigated Scott's company, she found it was drowning in red ink. Knowing a lot about business management, Tracy thought she would try to turn the company around. Scott's management was quite terrible, but the quality of the products he was creating was quite good. So, I thought it might be a good idea to rebuild it under my company. But, an absorption merger like this without notice is illegal. I'll sue. Well, why don't you check the loan repayment agreement first? Hey Michelle, get out the loan repayment agreement. At Scott's request, I pulled the loan repayment agreement from the drawer. When Scott saw the agreement, his eyes widened as if he saw something he shouldn't have. What is this? The agreement stated that the company was registered under my parents' names. Yes, Scott's company was established under the ownership of my parents. Actually, all the paperwork and necessary administrative tasks for setting up the company were done by my parents and Tracy. Therefore, they were able to change the company's registration to my parents' names without Scott noticing. With the passing of my parents, Tracy inherited half of their estate, which included Scott's company. Initially hesitant about the merger, I talked to Tracy about Scott and suggested that we get rid of Scott's company without his knowledge. That's when she told me about the inheritance. So, my company will become Tracy's property. Yes. We will be asking you to leave the company. Tracy. Could you at least hire me as a designer? Scott suddenly became humble, but his intentions were transparent. And Tracy glared at him. That's impossible. This strategy was to get rid of you, so hiring you is out of the question. So, does that mean I'll be unemployed? Yes, well, good luck. Scott stood there, dumbfounded. By the way, I have something to show you, Scott. I pulled out several photos from an envelope. The photos showed Kristen enjoying walks to hotels and shopping with men who were not Scott. Moreover, the companions were different in each photo. Some older than Scott, some younger. When I first saw these photos, I was fed up with Kristen's irresponsibility. Scott looked at the photos in shock. Kristen, you're walking with a man who isn't me. This isn't some kind of composite, is it? Actually, I hired a detective agency to catch your affair. It turned out Kristen was involved with multiple men. She might be something of a sugar baby. So, Nicole's father might not be me. It seems so. The detective said it wasn't you. Maybe you should get a DNA test. Seeing Scott about to cry, I decided to deliver the final blow. Scott, I can no longer be with you as a wife. I want a divorce. Also, I'll need compensation, child support for Aaron, and the repayment of the capital that my parents fronted, totaling about $150,000. I can't pay that kind of money, Michelle. Please, give me another chance. It's impossible. I've completely lost feelings for you. As Scott broke down crying on all fours, Tracy looked on blankly. Scott, no matter how much you struggle, it's hopeless. The damage you've done to Michelle can't be resolved with money. So, you must take responsibility at the very least. Crying, Scott turned to Tracy. Then shakily sat back down and slowly began to sign the divorce papers I laid out. After that, Scott incurred significant debt to pay the compensation and funds owed. Initially, I thought about allowing him to pay in installments. But Aaron advised against it. Do you think someone as unreliable as Dad can pay in installments? He'll definitely default. Realizing he was right, I demanded payment in full, as Aaron suggested. Scott's parents, concerned about their social standing, did not help with his debts. Unemployed, Scott struggled to find a new job. Having been virtually jobless for over 10 years, no company would hire him. He ended up working odd jobs introduced by debt collectors. I also demanded compensation from Kristen. She took on debt and worked day and night. As an office worker by day and a nightclub worker by night. Incidentally, the DNA test confirmed, as the detective had said, that Scott and Nicole were not related. Now, I run the company Tracy handed over to me, with Aaron helping with new product proposals. Mom, I want to use softer materials for our next product. That's a great idea. Let's try it. Working with Aaron is truly enjoyable, and he inspires me daily. What shall we do today? I live motivated by the joy of my work. You had leukemia, didn't you? Can't believe you're still alive. My father, who had chosen his mistress over me. And my mother 15 years ago when I was diagnosed at age 10. Uttered these unbelievable words when we unexpectedly met at a restaurant. And who's that girl next to you? Surely she's not your child. The father's gaze shifted to Mia, who sat beside me, his expression sour. Yes, she's my daughter. I got married 3 years ago. I thought you'd be struggling and living in poverty. Just like you and your mother, always a burden to society. Angered by his words, I stood up. Unable to tolerate any insult towards my mother, who had raised me single-handedly. Well, it's been a while. Welcome to my restaurant. My father, surprised by my mother's words, visibly widened his eyes in clear astonishment. What, you're joking? That's not funny at all. Oh, I'll explain properly then. Seeking revenge, my mother began to tell him about our current lives. I'm Anna, 25 years old. Today, I am here for lunch at a famous hamburger specialty restaurant. With my husband Tony and our 1-year-old daughter Mia. This popular restaurant recently expanded its stores. A place we had always wanted to visit. My mother was supposed to join us for lunch too. But she's running late due to a train delay. Mama, gimme. Yes, just wait a bit longer. I watched my daughter, Mia, pointing at the food on the next table. Clearly hungry and begging for food. Did you hear from Mom? Yes, she just arrived at the station. She should be here soon. Do you think the restaurant is hard to find? I'll go pick her up from the station. Tony, thank you. With that, Tony quickly put on his coat and left the restaurant. I thought, he's always so thoughtful. I'm glad I married him. I've always wanted a warm family because my parents divorced when I was 10. My mother told me that even when I was little, my father prioritized having fun over taking care of his kids. I remember him ignoring me even when I was sick in bed, and my parents often fought. Still, my mother took great care of me. She always came to my school events, but my father, busy with work, never came. The turning point for our family came when I was 10. One day, I was bedridden at home with a high fever. Every doctor we saw said it was just a cold. However, the fever continued for weeks without any sign of subsiding. As 2 weeks approached, my parents argued about whether to take me to a university hospital. I've told you many times. She's had a high fever for 2 weeks. It's just a coincidence. The doctor said it's a cold. Besides, do you know how much it costs to go to a university hospital? It's just a waste of money. How can you say that when Anna is suffering? Just do whatever you want. I'm not giving you any money. With that, my father left. I was delirious, but I still remember his back as he walked away. Shortly after, my mother took me to the university hospital. And I underwent a thorough examination. When it was over, the doctor spoke seriously to my mother. Please stay calm. The tests show she has leukemia. That can't be. If we had delayed the tests any longer, it could have been dangerous. You did well to bring her in. Hearing that, my mother apparently cried, relieved she hadn't made a mistake. I was soon admitted to the hospital and began treatment. Fortunately, the treatment started quickly and I was young enough to recover well. So my condition stabilized in about a month. My mother had kept in touch with my father. but he never visited during my hospitalization. When I was discharged and returned home, my father was no longer there. As I was confused, my mother calmly explained. Anna, listen carefully. Your father probably won't come back. Mom, what do you mean? Your father had been seeing another woman. As soon as he found out you were sick, he stopped contacting us. I guessed he would just leave. Can't I see Dad anymore? He chose his mistress over us. Understanding this, I felt an overwhelming sadness. Seeing me about to cry, my mother hugged me gently. It's okay, you have me. I won't let you feel lonely. As she said that, she hugged me even tighter. From then on, she raised me alone. While working, she took care of me and showered me with love. Though our time together was short, I never felt lonely. Gradually, I wanted to become a strong and kind woman like her. As I remembered these old times, I waited for Tony to return with my mother. Then, a familiar voice called out my name. Anna, is that you? I turned around in surprise to see an elderly man in ragged clothes. His beard was overgrown, and his hair looked unwashed for days. He was far from well dressed. I thought, I feel like I've seen him somewhere. I racked my brain but couldn't remember where. As I looked puzzled, the man laughed mockingly. Don't you remember your own father's face? You're still foolish as ever. Dad. Why are you here? What do you mean why? I came to eat. Is that a problem? Not really. Indeed, his smiling face resembled my father's from long ago. But my father should be 55 now. The man standing before me, dressed as he was, looked over 70. I thought I would never see my father again after he abandoned us. As a child, every time I remembered him and felt sad, I tried hard to forget him. Perhaps that's why I didn't recognize him immediately. More than the joy of seeing my father after so many years, I felt a complex mix of emotions. At a loss for words, my father spoke again. I mean, I didn't think you'd still be alive. What do you mean? You know, you had leukemia, right? Thanks to Mom taking me to the hospital right away, I recovered quickly. I still go to the hospital regularly. If we had delayed even a little, I might not have been able to live a normal life. Ha, that's good. I thought, his casual remark, after he insisted on leaving me alone back then. I felt anger rise within me as my father laughed it off as if it were someone else's problem. I glared at him, but he continued the conversation without concern. So, who's the girl next to you? Surely not your child. I looked at Mia sitting beside me. My father's expression was somewhat displeased. Yes, she's my daughter. I got married 3 years ago. Her name is Mia. She's 1 year old. What's the problem? It's none of your business. I thought you'd be struggling and living in poverty. After all, you and Susan are just burdens to society. How dare you say that? I stood up abruptly and raised my voice. Mia looked up at me, startled. I knew talking to him was pointless. I understood that. But I couldn't stand him insulting my mother, who had endured so much to raise me. Indeed, at the time, it seems it was quite a struggle to come up with the money for my sudden hospitalization and subsequent frequent visits. I saw my mother pleading with the hospital to delay payments while I was admitted. That's why I am so grateful and respectful toward her. And each time, my disdain for my father grew. With Mia present and not wanting to disturb the other customers, I couldn't afford to start a fight here. As my father and I were glaring at each other, Tony returned with my mother. Seeing me standing, Tony asked worriedly, "Anna, what happened? And who is this man?" "This is my father." "What? I thought your parents divorced when you were little." "Why is he here?" "I don't know. He just happened to be here. So, I came here to eat." "Got a problem with that?" my father said grumpily, creating a tense atmosphere among us. Then my mother, standing behind Tony, addressed my father. "Wow, long time no see. How many years has it been?" "Ah, you're here too. It's been a while. I never thought we'd meet again." "Why are you here? This place is popular lately, right?" "Wanted to try it out." "Oh, I'm glad. Welcome to my restaurant." My father's eyes widened, clearly taken aback by my mother's words. And he began to laugh weakly. "Ha, your restaurant? That's a good joke." "It's no joke. This is my restaurant. Well, one of many I own." "What do you mean?" My father was confused by my mother's unexpected statement. But she explained calmly. "Just as I said. I own this hamburger specialty store. It was originally a small business started by my father. After you left, I started helping out to make ends meet. Thanks to Mom getting involved, the stores started to multiply. Aren't we about to go national soon?" "No way you could do that. It's just a coincidence, isn't it?" My father seemed unwilling to acknowledge my mother's success. Just as I was about to retort, Tony spoke up. "Father, no offense, but maybe it's time you accepted it? Are you Anna's husband?" "What does this have to do with you? What do you even know?" "Well, it does concern me. Actually, I work at the corporate headquarters of this company." "That's right. Tony is one of our promising young executives. He's currently working as an executive candidate at the headquarters. Susan's ideas and proposals are always customer-oriented and have gained a lot of support within the company." "Thank you. I have high expectations for you." No, thank you very much." Tony and my mother spoke happily. Seeing them, I felt proud. Glancing at my father, his mouth hung open in shock. He looked down on my mother, who had become a company owner. And me, a frail child who married a promising young employee and had a child. He couldn't accept that the two he abandoned were leading happy lives. "What? I don't care about you guys." With that parting shot, my father hurried to the entrance. However, he hadn't paid yet and was stopped by a staff member trying to leave the restaurant without paying. He was then taken to the back office. After a while, a police car pulled up in front of the store. 3 officers entered and headed to the office. Watching the scene, a person who appeared to be the manager hurried over to my mother to explain the situation. It turns out my father was a habitual offender of dining and dashing. Not just at this hamburger store, but he had also caused trouble at other nearby stores. This time, he was caught in the act and arrested. He's been resisting the police. I could hear him talking loudly. It seems he's been having trouble with his family, and that led to his actions. After saying this to my mother, the manager returned to the office. I wondered what kind of situation had led my once hardworking father to resort to such measures. Seeing the father who had lost all semblance of his former self, I felt a bit of pity. The atmosphere at our table went completely silent. Then, my mother suddenly clapped her hands, looking at me and Tony. "Now that the troublemaker is gone, let's enjoy a delicious meal." "Mom, the new seasonal hamburger is really something special." "Tony, I'm sorry for involving you in our family issues. No, I don't mind at all. As my mother spoke, I felt my tense heart begin to relax. She must have been trying to create a bright atmosphere for me and Tony. I thought, I guess I still can't match up to my mother. With that thought, I decided to forget about my father and enjoy lunch with the four of us. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone. I thought, I've been contacting various places lately for Mia's daycare. Maybe it's related to that. I didn't have any strong leads, but I answered the phone anyway. To my dismay, it was the last voice I wanted to hear. It was my father. Hello? Anna? Dad? How did you get my number? Well, that doesn't matter, does it? Laughing carelessly, I wondered where he had gotten my number. Despite my anxiety, now wasn't the time to worry about that. The more pressing question was why he had called. Given that he had been driven to petty crimes, I didn't know what to expect from him now. I cautiously asked him, "So, what do you want? What are you planning to do to us? Hey, don't be so cold. I've actually got a good proposal for you and your mom." What do you mean by a good proposal? Listen up and be happy. I'll remarry Susan. Knowing her, she's probably still single, right? Dad, do you realize what you're saying? Of course, I do. Aren't you happy? Is this man insane? How could he think that abandoning us and then proposing to remarry would make us happy? There's no way my mother would accept it. How could I be happy about that? Have you forgotten what you did to us in the past? You mean when I left? If you want me to apologize, I'm sorry. The selfishness of my father infuriates me. I feel like I might say something harsh in anger. But I can't upset him now. I have my mother, Tony, and Mia to think about. I need to stay calm for their sake. My left hand, holding the smartphone, trembles with anger. Gripping it with my right hand to steady it, I asked my father, "So, what brought this on all of a sudden? What happened with the woman you were with?" "Oh, her? After I left home, a while later, we had a son." "I see. I thought I'd live happily with my new family. Especially since my sick daughter was out of the picture. But that woman, she was reckless with money. Even after our son was born, she never stopped going out. Kept buying designer bags, and before I knew it, she had run up debts without my knowledge. By the time I realized, she had vanished. My father spoke calmly about his situation, which was more troubled than I had imagined. I had assumed he was living happily after leaving us, but it seems that was not the case. His disheveled appearance and his dine and dash habits now made sense. He must have had his struggles. But that doesn't mean I should feel sorry for him. Look, she's got money, right? Think of it as filial piety and ask your mom, would you? Unbelievable. What? Don't bring this up now. How could you think I would forgive you? Hey, calm down. I am calm. Handle your own money. And don't ever involve us again. With that, I hung up the phone. He abandoned my mother and me when we were vulnerable. And now he turns to us when he's in trouble. He truly is the worst. I immediately informed my mother about the call. So I told him never to contact us again. I see. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Anna. It's okay. It's unbelievable, though. Did he really think I'd accept such a ridiculous proposal? My mother sighed in disbelief. She told me to ignore any further attempts to contact us and hung up the phone. Just as my mother predicted. Calls from what seemed to be my father's number came several times. I ignored all of them, and eventually, they stopped. He must have given up after being ignored so thoroughly. One day, I took Mia to visit my mother, who had just finished a busy period and was happy to see her granddaughter. Mia was also having a great time. While chatting with my mother and playing with Mia, the doorbell suddenly rang. Oh, what could that be? Maybe it's a delivery? Should I get it? You keep playing with Mia. Would you? Thank you. I stood up and went to the intercom. My blood ran cold when I saw who was on the screen. It was my father. I thought, how? I never told him where we moved. My heart raced as I struggled to stay calm and breathed deeply. Mom, Dad's here. What do you mean? He shouldn't know where we live since he left and we moved. He might have come here because I ignored his calls. But how did he find the house? While talking with my mother, the doorbell rang again. We decided to pretend no one was home, trying not to make any noise. However, the doorbell continued to ring repeatedly. Despite our continued silence, the knocking on the front door began, growing louder and more insistent. Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door. What should we do? You guys have money. Hurry up and hand it over. My father was getting increasingly agitated, raising his voice dangerously. It wasn't safe anymore, not for my mom or Mia. Something had to be done. Just then, my mother suddenly stood up and walked toward the door. And to my disbelief, she opened it. I thought, Mom, what are you doing? I hurried after her to the entrance. As my mother opened the door, my father tried to barge in. Despite this, my mother began to speak calmly. What are you doing? It's about time you opened up. You have money, right? Hand it over quickly. Yes, we do have money. But there's none for you. Just as my father attempted to strike her, a police officer grabbed his arm from behind. All right, calm down, please. The police? We received a call earlier. You're under arrest for trespassing. Trespassing? But she's my wife. Ignoring my father's protests, the police officers quickly restrained him and took him to their patrol car. As I stood there dumbfounded, my mother calmly locked the door. Mom, how could you remain so calm? You said there was a call earlier, but who? Oh, I called the police while you were checking the intercom. Really? I didn't notice at all. The police can't arrest someone without catching them in the act. That's why I deliberately let him in. As I slumped down, exhausted by the ordeal, my mother chuckled. How strong could one person be? I wondered if I would ever catch up to her. Later, we were informed by the police that my father was jailed. He was not only arrested for this incident but was also charged with multiple other offenses, including shoplifting and dine and dashing. Unable to afford bail, he remained in custody. My mother also concerned herself with my father's son, contacting child services. They later informed us that the boy, now a junior in high school, was living in a facility. He was doing well and excelling academically. So they assured us there wasn't much to worry about. Although he wasn't living with his father, he occasionally visited him. Look, Mia, here's the new hamburger. Eat up. Thanks, Grandma. Years have passed, and Mia has grown significantly. Watching their cheerful conversation fills me with happiness. I never thought I'd be so disrupted by my father at this age. While I feel sorry for him, I certainly don't aspire to be like him. Instead, I'll use his example as a lesson on how not to live, striving for a happy life. My name is Wendy Hansen. I'm a 30-year-old office worker, and currently in the happiest state of my life as I'm about to get married. My life has been filled with sadness until now. Ever since my younger sister, Emma, was born, I've felt lonely. My mother occasionally paid attention to me, but mostly it was all about Emma. Emma was allowed to take various lessons, whereas I was never given such opportunities. I'm graduating from this sad and difficult environment. I'm marrying Robert, whom I've been dating for many years. I didn't like going to my parents' house, but I had to visit for the marriage greeting. When I arrived, Emma was waiting with a smile. I muttered words to myself, but kept a pleasant face and began the greetings. Then, Emma constantly ridiculed him until she found out what he was doing. After that, it was a barrage of questions for Robert. She ignored me and kept asking him questions. I had a bad feeling, but nothing happened. And we were able to have our wedding without issues. I cherished the joy of marrying the man I love, wearing the wedding dress I had dreamed of. As the ceremony progressed and we were about to kiss, a dramatic scene unfolded. Wait a minute. Suddenly, my sister stood up. What now? Sister, how could you do this to me? What's wrong? Everyone, please listen. My sister looks happy, but she stole him from me. We've been together for a long time, but my sister. She's making a happy face after stealing my boyfriend. The child in my stomach is his child. Please give him back to me. Wendy, as a sister, what are you doing? Stealing a boyfriend from your cute sister. The wedding is off. Either that or change the bride. Your father's order is absolute. Sister, please, give him back to me. Emma was crying and clinging to me, and our father kept making appeals. What are you talking about? You. What are you laughing at? Unbelievable. Please give me a break. Robert, you're laughing too? Why are you laughing? Well, that's right. You left pregnant Emma for Wendy, didn't you? That's the worst. Dad, Emma, please give me a break. I can't stop laughing. All this time, you've only been a nuisance to my life. And now you even come to disrupt my wedding? Sister, that's awful. I'm pregnant. That's why I'm laughing. Because, you know? When I continued speaking, Emma and our father were shocked. We already knew that Emma would disrupt the wedding like this. Why did we know? Because Robert had been telling me everything Emma was doing to him. I've been talking to Robert about my parents and Emma since we were kids. Therefore, Robert was worried about me. That's why whenever Emma took any action, Robert informed me immediately. Since Robert went to greet my parents for our marriage, Emma had been clinging to him non-stop. She became interested in him because he said he was a company president. Robert and I have been together since elementary school, childhood friends. While my parents went out to buy new clothes for Emma or to her lesson recitals, I couldn't understand why I was never taken along and spent my time alone in the park. I knew they always went to eat barbecue after Emma's recitals. So I once asked my father why I couldn't go. He said, "We don't have the money to take you." If that was the case, they should have stopped the 5 different lessons Emma was taking. But I couldn't understand why I, who was born first, was treated so casually. As sad as it was, I thought it was pointless to say anything. So I always played alone in the park when my father and Emma were away. The one who played with me was Robert. Robert didn't have family problems and was raised by wonderful parents. His parents, always worried about me, told their classmate Robert, "Play with her. It's dangerous for a girl to be alone," and he always came to play. I really liked Robert from a young age, and he gradually started to like me too. In middle school, we began dating. What Robert said then was, "At first it was more like playing with a little sister, but gradually I came to like you." Indeed, at first, it was probably out of pity. However, our relationship has continued since middle school. When Emma first encountered Robert and me together in high school, I returned home to hear, "I can't stand to see people happy. But if it's such an unattractive guy, I don't need him." "Sister, you're plain, so he suits you." "Such a boring and plain guy, just right for my sister." "Sister is so dull, no one will ever love you, so he's just right for you." "Have you seen my boyfriend? I just stole him from a classmate, he's the most handsome guy in school." Despite being sisters, the difference in our boyfriends is like heaven and earth. "Sister, you can't compare to me in anything. In studies, sports, number of friends, number of lovers, and even our parents' love." Right. Are we done here? Oh dear. You're sulking because I hit the nail on the head. It was always like this. But I love Robert, and that's enough for me. Indeed, I can't compare to Emma in studies, sports, the number of friends, or past lovers, nor the affection from our parents. But none of that matters. I have a loving partner and friends. While family certainly means blood relations, being connected by blood is all it is. Family isn't the only source of love, nor the only place where I can give love. I might be seen as lonely, but I'm fine with that. I have been with Robert all this time, but during that period, Emma has been dating various men. Every week, a different man would visit our house, which honestly disgusted me. I disliked it so much that I spent a lot of time at Robert's house. His parents are incredibly kind, and being with them was always comfortable. They would say every day, "Marry soon and come live with us." I was truly happy. When I returned home, I would return to a house under Queen Emma's reign. "Emma, what about your driver's license? I can drive when I turn 16, right? If so, I want a car when I turn 16. Then get Wendy to buy it for you. She's starting a job next month, right? Once she gets her first paycheck, she should take out a loan and buy a car." That's a great idea. "Sister, please. That plain boyfriend of yours, his parents seem to have strong connections, right? It wouldn't be bad if they bought you a car under the pretext it's for my sister. Enough already. What do you think I am? But you're the older sister? You are Emma's sister, aren't you? Then act like it. Always a nuisance at home. What are you thinking? Hey. Did I just say I'm always a nuisance? How much of a nuisance have I been? I even paid back my high school tuition with part-time jobs. And my junior college tuition was almost nothing since I entered as a scholarship student. And I paid it with my own part-time job earnings. I even paid for my license with savings, and I plan to buy a car once I start working. Give me a break. I'll be leaving home next week. Do whatever you like." Saying this, I went into my room. Even my room was the attic. As Emma grew and accumulated more stuff, my room became Emma's. And I was relegated to the attic. This life is over for me. Starting next week, I stayed at Robert's parents' house. Once I got a job, Robert and I planned to move to New York. So I decided to stay with them for a while. Since then, I had virtually no contact with my family until the marriage greeting. And I hadn't met Emma or my parents even once. When we finally met for the marriage greeting after a long time, Emma greeted us with a smirk. When she realized my boyfriend was Robert, she burst into laughter. Oh dear. Even that plain guy has improved a bit. But he's not on my level. What a relief. I was worried what I would do if my sister's boyfriend turned out to be high-spec. But I guess I didn't need to worry. Robert is Wendy's boyfriend? He can't be decent. Right. I worried for nothing. She began to mock us. And? What is that plain guy even doing? It'd be great if he was still a freeter at this age. Nice to meet you again, I'm Robert Hansen. I'm currently the president of a venture company in New York. The reason our marriage was delayed was because it took time to get the company off the ground, but now we are finally able to marry. It seems we're not very welcome here, so now that the greetings are done, we'll take our leave. Huh? What? President? What? Wendy's husband is a president? That's right. So, goodbye. We'll send the wedding invitation later, but if you don't come, that's fine too. As Robert and I tried to leave the house, wait. If you're going, go alone. Robert is also becoming family, we'd like to talk to him. No, I have nothing to discuss, so excuse us. Saying this, Robert took my hand and we left the house. It's just as you said. Their eyes changed the moment you said president. That's embarrassing. Sorry for making you feel uncomfortable. It's okay. Wendy, you did nothing wrong. Thank you. Saying this, we returned to our normal life, but a change occurred the next day. Emma went out of her way to come to New York and started hitting on Robert. She searched for his name online, found his company, and tried to get involved. However, Robert isn't the type to be swayed by such things. Whether she disliked that or was fueled because he was unattainable, in the end, she tried to get a job at Robert's company by interviewing, but of course, she was rejected. I thought she would give up after this, but to my surprise, she started a relationship with one of the company's managers. Then she would ask about Robert's drinking parties from the manager, and tried to show up pretending to be there coincidentally. Or even tried to force her way into a taxi Robert was taking. She kept taking the worst actions. Knowing she had been acting this way, I could laugh when she made such assertions at the wedding. And there was another reason why we were laughing. It was because Robert cannot have children. We found out Robert was infertile when we both underwent a bridal check before. The reason my marriage was delayed wasn't only because of the time it took to stabilize his company, but also because Robert was resisting, thinking I might want children. In fact, we were already engaged when I started working. And Robert was launching his business. We were supposed to get married immediately. But unexpected issues extended our engagement to nearly 10 years. During that time, Robert and I had faced many conflicts. I can't have a family. You can have children, but you can't build a happy family with me. That's why you shouldn't marry me. Why would you say that? I've never known a happy family before. I wasn't even loved by my parents, so what does a happy family mean? Moreover, I don't even know if I can love my own children. I just don't know how to love. But I was certainly happy receiving love from you and your parents. However, I honestly don't know how cute my own children would be. I just don't know. But it's okay. I love you. So, let's not talk about children anymore. For now, just focus on getting the company on track, and once it's settled, marry me. If you hate me and never want to deal with me again, that's fine. But if you feel even a little upset seeing me walking with another man, you must still love me, right? Is it okay? If you leave me, I will appear before you walking with another man I don't know. I hate that. Are you really okay with that? Of course. Please, let's stay together so Robert cannot have children. I didn't want to say this in front of everyone as it might hurt Robert, but he made it clear. I can't have children. So, it's impossible that you have my child. I am infertile. There was a moment of silence in the venue after Robert's confession. However, gradually, applause broke out. It must have been a round of applause moved by his courageous confession. Emma's face was contorted, and all eyes in the venue were directed at her with not a gentle expression. Everyone was looking at her coldly. Come on. She started it. Let's listen carefully. Whose child is it, and why did she disrupt our happiest day? Can we get an answer? It was the first time I saw Robert looking so intimidating. Even though we have been together since elementary school. Whose child is it? You need to tell us clearly. Could it be that you don't even know whose child it is? Because you've been involved with someone from our company? As Robert pressed her, Emma's face grew more and more contorted. Then, a manager from Robert's company who was sitting in the middle of the venue stood up. Didn't you tell me before that you were pregnant with my child? And took money from me to get an abortion? How did it become Robert's child? Explain that. Following this, voices rose from the venue one after another. I also gave her $1,000, me too. As Robert said, Emma had been involved with many people from his company. It was truly chaotic. What kind of wedding is this? I don't know if the father ever thought such a thing would happen. Or really believed it was Robert's child, but he just stood there stunned. However, suddenly, he began yelling. If someone in the company got my daughter pregnant, you as the president should take responsibility. You should just marry Emma quickly. Come on, Wendy. You are her sister, right? Give up your place to her. I was so appalled I was on the verge of tears. Then, it wasn't Robert who shouted but my mother. Enough. Aren't you ashamed? Mom? I'm truly embarrassed. Wendy, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake raising Emma. I'm really sorry. When I was a child, I always felt neglected because my parents spent all their time on my older sister, and I thought if I ever had siblings, I wouldn't want them to feel that way. So I talked with your father about treating my sister equally. But maybe out of my own unfortunate experiences, I ended up prioritizing Emma for lessons and shopping. It's all my fault. I'm truly sorry. Emma. You need to apologize properly for this. Really, stop it now. My mother was confessing to me. Honestly, with everything that had happened, even when my mother said this, I couldn't just say, Mom, it's okay. Thank you. However, instead of reflecting after being scolded by our mother, Emma said, yes, it's Mom's fault. So, it's not my fault. Robert? Shall we have our vow kiss? It will all be settled then. Once we take our vows, I win. Saying this, Emma approached Robert. However, Robert refused. When she pushed a little, Emma stumbled and fell. Nonetheless, undeterred, she approached Robert again. Wait, Emma, weren't you pregnant? Pregnant? Because normally, if you were, wouldn't you panic after falling? Oh. Emma looked awkward. You, perhaps. Yes. Yes, exactly. I was never pregnant. I just thought if I said I was pregnant, people panicked and started giving me money because I didn't have any. Everyone just throws money without thinking. It's really stupid, right? People can't take responsibility for their actions. I just took money from those who have it because what I got from Dad wasn't enough. I did nothing wrong, and those who gave me money are just stupid. The thing is, I just hate my sister. Despite always being favored, she was loved by more people at school than I was. I had many friends, but they didn't really like me. They were just after the guys around me. Any man I dated and broke up with would immediately start dating my friends. And some of them even got married. They seemed bored from the moment they started dating me. But they looked happy dating my friends. And if I ever took a guy from a friend, everyone would abandon me. It was just because those men were stupid to follow me. Everyone is just using me. Yet my sister gets to go out with her close friends, and Robert is always all about her. Even Robert's family values her. What is that about? And, Mom always said she cared about me. But she was always going on about buying something for my sister. I did have my parents spend money on me. But I never felt loved. They think spending money is love. But what I really wanted was to be praised no matter what. It was never about praise for me, just rewards like barbecues, toys, or clothes. Mom would praise my sister when she scored well on tests. But when I did well, Dad would just say, "Emma got good grades. We'll have to reward her after her lessons are done," and I never got praised. It's always about my sister. No one really cares about me. Robert just likes pitiful people, right? You see? I'm really pitiful, right? Why don't you switch to me? Don't be ridiculous. Sure, it's sad not to be praised, but what you've done is truly despicable. Always trying to one-up Wendy. And even disrupting such an important ceremony like this. I really hate people like you. And you seem to have hurt quite a few employees at the company. In my company, I only have capable and trustworthy staff. I don't usually give directives about personal lives. But to think that so many were deceived by someone like you is truly a terrible situation. This ceremony cannot go on. It will be postponed. And that will incur costs. You will be billed for those expenses. And I will also seek reimbursement for the money you defrauded from my employees. Unless you refund everything, I can file a police report. What you do next will greatly affect your future. What is that? Despite liking pitiful women, why am I not good enough? Wendy is not pitiful at all. My love for Wendy isn't out of pity. Wendy is always cheerful. She talks about what happens, but she never speaks ill of you or your parents. Plus, she always has dreams and works hard towards them. I found that very attractive. When I was starting up the company and it was tough, Wendy was also going through hard times. But she supported me. And Wendy didn't tell you, but she is now running a company too. Ever since we were in middle school, Wendy talked about starting a business. We talked about our dreams together. That was really fun. Wendy has channeled all her anger towards you into her dreams. And made significant strides. The way she can turn her negative feelings into energy so beautifully is truly amazing. Wendy and you are entirely different. You always blame others. But Wendy doesn't blame anyone. There's nothing to blame her for. Unfortunately, I can never forgive you. I will always love only Wendy. I've only lived for 30 years. But in that short life, I have loved Wendy for 20 years. I am confident that I will continue to love only Wendy forever." With that, Robert kissed me. The priest, who was surprised by what was happening, smiled and said, "I guess that's a vow. I'm not sure if this is okay, but for now, our ceremony is concluded." Robert's colleagues were angry with Emma, and my associates were giving her cold looks. I informed everyone to leave the venue and announced that we would hold a party on another day. Robert, my parents, Emma, and Robert's parents also joined the discussion. And we all decided that all the expenses from this incident would be charged to Emma. Although she complained, what awaited Emma was a lawsuit from the employees of Robert's company. She had already spent all the money and claimed she had none left, then ran away. Her miserable escape was such that no one bothered to chase after her. Weeks passed without any word from Emma. However, she eventually appeared before me. "Sister, you're really the worst. Emma, everyone was worried about you." "Worried? Just about whether they could get their money back?" "What do you mean?" "Never mind. I'm now in debt hell. And sister, you have Robert's money and your own from starting a business. Don't you think that's unfair?" "So, I've been thinking. You're just too happy, aren't you, sister? So, I need to make you unhappy. What are you planning to do? You only have Robert, right? Then I should just take Robert from you." "Robert won't be going to you." "I know that. But what if I became a criminal? His company would end, he would disappear from your life. And it might even affect your company. What are you planning to do?" "I'll throw myself in front of the car Robert is driving. I don't care what happens to me, I can handle that much." "What are you saying? Are you okay?" "I'm not okay. How am I supposed to live with no money? If it hurts you and Robert, that's fine by me." "Is that so? Well, let me tell you something. Robert never drives himself, he has a chauffeur. And since I use trains, I don't ride in cars much. So your plan might not work as you think. Unfortunately, whatever you try to do is meaningless. Also, this lifestyle ends tomorrow. We had our wedding in the US, and now we're moving abroad. Robert has delegated his company to other staff members in the US. And we're moving to France to start a new company. The business we talked about starting? It's something Robert and I are doing together. We've always wanted to work in France. So, our dream is coming true. I know what you want to do to us, but we're no longer paying attention to you. I don't know what will happen to you, but as an adult, you should take responsibility for your actions." With that, Emma crumbled. I passed by her and entered the company. As Emma had said, she fell into debt hell. Several of Robert's company's employees sued her. And she tried to ask our father for help, but our mother refused. Emma was disowned and left the house. She tried to find work, but nothing went well, and she eventually turned to nightlife jobs. However, due to her selfish nature, she couldn't build good relationships with clients and was fired from several places. Eventually, with no money, she considered robbing a bank. "I'm Emma. Give me the money," she declared without a weapon, just barging into the bank, which led to her immediate arrest. Our parents didn't come to her rescue this time. Due to the stupidity of the robbery, it made the news. And Emma was quickly released, but likely won't be able to live in the US anymore. However, with no money, Emma is now working in a factory. She never paid us back for the wedding. But she's suffering more than enough, so it doesn't matter. I don't know what kind of life she will have from now on, but it's unlikely to be a good one. Robert and I are still happily living together. Life abroad was unfamiliar, but life with Robert has been happy. We'll continue to live together, aiming for our dreams. I'm sure that together, Robert and I can achieve our dreams in France. I truly believe that from the bottom of my heart.